Hey guys, in this episode, I'm going to be talking about how I came up with the idea for my film. I'm going to be giving a rough timeline of the several drafts that I came up with, and I'm going to be talking about some of the inspirations that went behind writing this film. So stick around because this is going to be a packed one. So if you're new here, my name is Sandy Sanchez. Welcome to my channel, Sandy's Film Journey. And in this channel, I'm going to be producing my very first animated short, Lucid, and I'm going to be documenting every step of the process. This is episode 2. Let's get started. So before you sit down to watch your favorite film or your favorite TV show, before any of the cast is selected, before any of the locations are scouted, or before any part of the production begins, the first thing that needs to be completed is the script. So within the context of my film, back in 2017, I was in talks with a producer to potentially work at a certain studio. Long story short, I unfortunately didn't get the job. And throughout the job search, you learn to develop thick skin to rejection. But I remember that at that time, I was pretty upset because this seemed like a really exciting opportunity for me. Through those feelings of rejection, that's where I sort of came up with the idea of what if I had a story where a character chases something he can never catch? And that's how I came up with the idea for this film. At the time, I was also experimenting a lot with After Effects and really getting to know a lot of the features and diving deep into the program. And so I figured with this new idea that I had conjured up, why not make this a series of shorts of me running throughout the city where I'm chasing some sort of 3D object, and then that way I can use this idea as an excuse to practice my After Effects skills. And it would be just a series of short just shots of me running, and I can just knock these out, and there would be a series of one-offs. But at the time, I wasn't sort of planning to make this a whole production much like how it is now. This was going to be sort of a quick sort of exercise with After Effects using live action and 3D. But as I began to entertain this idea a lot more, I realized that if I wanted to shoot it in live action, I would need somebody helping me out, whether it be setting up the tripod, whether it be holding the camera, getting the camera movements, setting up the lighting. I would have to get permission to shoot in certain areas in New York. And plus this person would have to be following me into the city at night, which I figured would be a hassle. And I wasn't going to be paying this person. I didn't have a budget. These were personal projects I was trying to realize. So I figured instead of giving myself all this extra work and relying on somebody else's availability, why not just make this project fully animated? I was still considering this to be a short project. I was thinking of making something comedic with a couple of gags, a couple of slapstick jokes in there, and then that would have been it. There was only one problem though. I couldn't really figure out the plot. I knew that at this point, I wanted a character chasing this thing throughout the city, and it would be exciting and it would be fast paced. And I say thing because at this point, I hadn't come up with the idea to make it a flame, but the story needed milestones, it needed events. Why was this character chasing this thing? What would happen if this character eventually caught this thing? Why was this thing running away from the character? What could be some interesting obstacles that I could throw in front of this character to make the chase more interesting? I had all these questions coming up, but I just couldn't find any answers to them. At this point, I had already come up with a crude storyboard, which unfortunately has gone missing. I also had 2 drafts of the script at this point, but I wasn't very happy with where I was. So I started looking through other media for inspiration that made me help me get the creative juices flowing as to maybe some events in the plot that I could sort of begin to nail down. One time I was looking at Barnes & Noble, and lo and behold, I found these 2 books, which were exactly what I was looking for. So this book, which is called New York in the Snow, I'm gonna throw up footage of the book up on the screen. But basically, it was this artist that, over the course of several years, took pictures of New York in the snow on different cameras, some on their iPhones, some on their professional cameras and everything. But it was exactly what I was looking for. And it was a great starting point for me to start getting ideas on the visual look of the film. The second book that I found a little over to the left on that very same shelf was this one. And it is called Unsanctioned: The Art of New York Streets. And what this book is basically a collection of different photographs of different interesting graffiti throughout the city and street art. And so I figured that, New York is a very sort of quirky city. It's got different faces to it, right? If for anybody who's never been there, but New York has a very sort of eclectic blend of just different styles and moods and vibes. At this point, I was also thinking of lots of different locations to be able to have the film take place, like for instance Times Square, Central Park, the Astor Place Cube in downtown, which actually would have played a big part in some of the earlier scripts. So by now it was 2019 and I was already on my 5th or 6th script, and I came across this book called Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre, who's a famous French author. In the book, the main character Anton feels this overwhelming sense of self-awareness and disgust towards his own existence and towards others. And the only way he can really describe this sort of overwhelming self-awareness is, he calls it the nausea. And throughout several parts of the story, he feels this nausea. I just thought it was sort of an interesting thing. At this point, I couldn't really find anything of interest for my story. So I read the book, I finished it, I put it down, and then that was that. Then the pandemic came, and these were some really dark days in my life, and it affected my mental health. I began to reevaluate my worldview and my belief systems. During this time, I kept reading, one, because I wanted to use it as a distraction from what was going on, and two, I wanted to continue working on my film, and I had come across another French author called Albert Camus. Well, he's French Algerian. I read more of his body of work. I came across the myth of Sisyphus, which, if you don't know about the myth of Sisyphus, it's an ancient Greek story about a Greek king who deceives the gods, and then he's banished to Hades, where he's supposed to roll a rock up a hill, and then the rock rolls down, and then he's tasked with doing this for the rest of eternity. Albert Camus' essay talks about how this story is an analogy to most people's lives, and how our lives feel meaningless. During this time, I felt like this story really spoke to me, and also I felt like this could serve as a really good motif for my film. So by this point, I had finally found the motif, or a sort of theme that I could base my film around, and then I could sort of move forward, and then a lot of the other pieces of the story began to fall in place. I remember having read Nausea a year before. I was able to sort of piece together a story that I was actually happy with. And in the story, I was going to have my main character feel the same feelings that Anton had, where he feels this overwhelming sense of self-awareness. And this flame comes along to distract the character from feeling these feelings. And so the character feels the need to chase this flame, but he's never really able to catch it. But the flame is there just to distract him from doing any real self-reflection. And so I was finally feeling a lot better about this plot. From here, the story went from being a simple one-off, which was just going to be an exercise in After Effects, to now being a serious meditation about my changing worldview, my changing beliefs, me going from being a sort of agnostic religious person to an atheist. And this film was going to explore all these feelings that I had of isolation during the pandemic, of failure, of being disillusioned with things. And this was going to be the new tone of the film. So it went from being a sort of comedic one to a very serious, slow-paced film. By this point, I was on the 7th draft. I rewrote it, and finally, in March of this year, I was able to finally complete the final draft that I have now, that I'm finally happy with. And this new draft is the one that I've moved forward with, and that I've begun to storyboard as well. If you look at the social media, my Instagram and my TikToks, a lot of that work is work from previous drafts that I was trying to move forward with. Anything that I do now is from this sort of 8th script that I have now. And so a lot of this work is new, and this is the work that I want to document and that I want to sort of put out there to be able to sort of show my process. So for now, that's it, guys. Thanks for sticking around. That's pretty much the whole story with me and the script in regards to the writing aspect of it. The next video, I'm going to be talking about the visual inspiration of it, some of the looks that I wanted to capture, and where I sort of got my inspiration from, some different media that I drew from, photos, movies. And in the next video, I'll be talking more about that, and I'll show more footage on that stuff. So thanks for sticking around, and I'll see you in the next one.